Welcome back, everyone. In this lecture, we're going to give you a brief tour of the DateTime module, which essentially allows you to create objects that have information not just on the date or the time, but also things like time zone and operations between DateTime objects, such as how many seconds have passed or how many days have passed. Let's check this all out in a Jupyter Notebook. All right, to begin using DateTime, let's first explore the time factor. To do that, I'm going to first say import DateTime, and then we're going to create a DateTime object. So I will say my time is equal to DateTime.time, and if you do Shift Tab here, you'll notice it takes a couple of arguments: an hour, a minute, a second, a microsecond, and then time zone information. If you do not provide certain information, it's just going to automatically fill it in. For example, let's only provide the hour and the minute. So let's go ahead and say it's 2 a.m. So notice it's going to work on a 24-hour clock, and then it's 20 minutes past 2 a.m. So now, if I take a look at this my time object, and I hit .tab after I've defined it, I can actually access things like the minute. So this is an attribute, and I can see the minute portion is 20 minutes. And I can check that the hour portion is 2 hours. Again, this is running on a 24-hour clock. So if I actually just print out my time, it's going to print out 2:20, and then it'll automatically fill in the seconds with 0. Let's imagine I only defined hour 2, and I rerun this. It'll automatically fill in minutes as zeros, hours 2, and when I print the time, it says it's just 2 o'clock. Everything's kind of filled in with zeros. Now, this can actually go up to microseconds. So you could, if you wanted to, give microsecond level information. So in this case, it'll automatically fill it in as 0. But if you did want that sort of information, you would just keep going through the levels. So hour, minute, second, microsecond, and even time zone information. So you can go all the way for something like, if you want to be very precise, you can do, let's go ahead and do something kind of in the PM. So 1300 hours, 20 minutes, 1 second, and then 20 microseconds. So if you run this, you can see we get all that information back, and you'll notice that it continues on with the microseconds. If you don't define microseconds, it won't bother to display them for you. And again, microseconds typically are using that in a more scientific setting. Okay, now we saw that this time instance, if we check out what type of object my time is, it's a DateTime.time object. So it only holds values of time. It has no date associated with this. What we could do, though, is add in date information using a date object or a combined DateTime object. So let's begin exploring date objects themselves. To do this, I'll say today is equal to, then we'll say DateTime.date. And if I wanted to, here's where I could begin defining the year, month, and day. Or I could grab information on today by using the method call today. And now, after running that, I can print out today, and it'll say it's 2020, June 12th. So notice here, the format follows the European kind of standard, which is the year, the month, the date. And in general, most programming languages will follow this sample from kind of the largest time scale, years, to smaller and smaller, months, days, and so on. And just as you might have expected, all of these are attributes. So I can grab the year, the month, and the date as well, or the day. So 12, which means I can grab portions of this. And Python also allows you to return something called ctime formatting, which is just another way of formatting this along with some time information. So I can say, go ahead, grab today, call ctime on it, and it'll print it out in this format where it will give you the day in 3 letters, the month, the date itself. If you added time information, which we'll show you how to do in just a second, it'll be there, and then the year itself. So sometimes certain databases store time in this format, so it might be useful. So let's say now you don't just want date information, and you also don't want just time information. You actually want date time information, so information that combines both of these. You can say from DateTime import, and this is where it looks a little weird. you actually import datetime from datetime because the object happens to be the same thing or called the same thing as the module because it combines both date information and time information. And if we take a look at datetime, notice now it takes in both year, month, and day, as well as everything from hour, minute, second, microsecond, and time zone information. So all of that now is available to you. So I could do something like, let's see, the year 2021, let's say October 3rd, and then I can continue on to the actual hour. I can say it's going to be 1400 hours, 20 minutes, and let's say 1 second. And now I can see I have this datetime object, so I can say my datetime is equal to this, and now I can call all that information, or I can just print it out. So we run this, and we see the information printed out here, again, going from the largest time scale, year, down to the smallest, month, day, hour, minute, second, and so on. Now, for some reason, you made a mistake or you need to do some sort of replacement, like for instance, I accidentally said 2021 and I need this to all be in 2020. I can do that with the replace functionality. So I can take my datetime object, call replace on it, and then I simply say what the attribute I want to replace is, such as the year, and then specify that it should be another year, like 2020. We run that, and now it returns back the same information, but with whatever you want to replace, replaced. And what I could do is then update it. So this doesn't actually happen in place. I'd have to say my datetime is now equal to this. And now when I print my datetime, it's supposedly fixed if that's what I needed to fix. So you can use the replace parameter or method call in order to do that to your current dates. Now, something that's really common to perform with datetime objects or date objects is just simple arithmetic. For example, let's say someone logs in to your website on a certain day and then they log back out on another day or at a certain date time, or they leave at a certain date time. You probably want to figure out, well, how long did they spend on my website or how long did they spend logged in? And we can perform simple arithmetic to solve for these. And you can perform arithmetic either on a date object or a date time object. So we still need that date information there. Let me show you a couple of examples. Let's first do it with just pure date information. And date, recall if we come up here, is datetime.date. Alternatively, it's the same thing as saying something like from datetime import date. So it's up to you which one you want to use. Let's create two dates. Going to create date 1, and let's just say this is sometime in the future. Go ahead and say maybe 2021, and we'll make this November 3rd. And date 2 is going to be, let's say 2020, November 3rd. What I can do is actually perform direct arithmetic on this to figure out the difference between them. So I can say how much time is between date 1 and date 2 by taking this one in the future and subtracting this one. So I run this, and it returns back this time delta object. And as you might have guessed, if you take the difference between two date objects, it reports back the difference in number of days. And we could do something like result is equal to date 1 minus date 2. And if you check the type of this result, it's a special time delta object, which has its own properties and attributes, which you could find useful sometimes. So you can actually just call how many days have passed, run that, and it returns back 365 days, which makes sense because these are directly a full year apart. Something to keep in mind, though, is that if you're doing this for really long distances between years, that is to say, you may have issues with leap years. So it may not be exactly 365 days per year. Instead, you may encounter a leap year with an additional day. All right. So the other thing we can do is perform arithmetic on a date time object. And we can either call this with datetime.datetime, or as we saw here, say from datetime import datetime. Let's create two datetime objects. We'll say datetime1 is equal to datetime, and let's go ahead and use the same dates. And then what we're going to do is say 1 occurs at, let's just say 2200 hours. So that's datetime 1. Recall 22 here is hours, this is minutes. And then datetime 2 is equal to datetime. And let's do the same dates. They're 1 year apart, but we're also going to make them, let's say, 10 hours apart. So we run that, and now let's go ahead and check the difference between datetime 1 minus datetime 2. Run that, and now it returns back 2 points of information, total days, and you'll notice it returns back total seconds. So it's returning back 36,000 seconds. We know these are 10 hours apart, so I can check on this by saying 36,000 divided by, if we want to figure out maybe how many hours apart they are, I could say 36,000 divided by 60 to get minutes, divided by 60 to get hours. We run that, and we get back those 10 hours. If I save this as a result, let's copy this, say my difference is equal to datetime 1 minus datetime 2. You'll notice there's attributes here, and I can actually grab the total seconds, or seconds, between them, which is 36,000. If I say my diff, and the total seconds is then now inclusive of not just the seconds in between them, but also how many seconds are in 365 days. So this is just the seconds portion. This is everything reported as seconds. That's it for this brief lecture on datetime module. You'll often find yourself encountering this if you're ever dealing with a database. Thanks, and I'll see you at the next lecture.